The biggest loser of the Notre Dame versus Penn State semifinal matchup is not James Franklin, it's not Drew Waller, it's actually LSU head coach Brian Kelly. Because when Brian Kelly left Notre Dame for the LSU job, his reasoning for that was because he felt like LSU gave him more resources that he wasn't getting at Notre Dame to better his chances of being able to win a national championship. And all he's done at LSU is underachieve. This guy had a Heisman Trophy winner, Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., who were all first rounders in the NFL in last year's draft. He had a lead offensive line, and he couldn't even win the SEC championship. And with the playoffs now including 12 teams, you would have thought that LSU, with all of the talent that they bring in on a year-to-year basis, how well Brian Kelly recruits, they would have been a lock to be in the playoffs every single year. But instead, they underachieve. And yet Marcus Freeman has elevated Notre Dame to a level that they were unable to get to with Brian Kelly as the head coach. I got an alarming stat for you LSU fans. During Brian Kelly's 3 years in Baton Rouge, he is 4-9 against ranked opponents. And not all of those losses came against SEC teams. This past year, you lost to USC. And then in the years prior, you went 0-2 against Mike Norvell and Florida State when you played them in the season opener. Meanwhile, Marcus Freeman, with his recent playoff win against Penn State, he's now 14-5 against ranked teams during his tenure replacing Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. That now ties him for the most ranked wins with Kirby Smart at Georgia over that span. Marcus Freeman was an upgrade, and Brian Kelly going to LSU was a downgrade for them in some capacity because they haven't reached the same level of success that you thought they would have been when they initially made that decision to get Brian Kelly to leave South Bend for Baton Rouge. And the differences between Marcus Freeman and Brian Kelly is that, for one, Marcus Freeman is more likable. The players relate to him better than what they did with Brian Kelly. When Brian Kelly gave his exit speech to the players, the guys didn't really seem like they cared. And then a few seconds later, when Brian Kelly walks out the room and Marcus Freeman comes in, all the players are cheering, they're hooraying, they're hugging them, they're celebrating. And I find it weird how none of the players that Brian Kelly recruited at Notre Dame followed them to play for him at LSU. I think that shows a lot. Brian Kelly is a good coach, but not a great coach, because I think that the one area that Marcus Freeman thrives in that Brian Kelly kind of lacks is the fact that he's able to develop a better relationship with his players, and he doesn't need to have a stacked team to do so. Marcus Freeman says that we're not going to major in the transfer portal. We're going to minor in the portal. We're only going to get a select few of players out of the portal. Meanwhile, you got Brian Kelly who keeps saying that I need more talent. I need more of this. I need more of that. You already took the LSU job because they had everything you need to win, and yet you still don't have enough. Brian Kelly has gone all out in the portal this year. They have one of the best portal classes, but I still don't think that's going to translate to success on the field because Brian Kelly is not that good of a coach. You know, having a talented team doesn't guarantee that you're going to win. We've seen plenty of coaches over the last couple of years, like Mike Elko at Duke and Kalen DeBoer at Washington, do more with less. Kalen DeBoer took Washington to the national championship, along the way taking down Dan Lanning twice and Steve Sarkisian with a roster that was vastly inferior to what those schools had. You know, they had the 31st rated roster according to the 247 Sports Team Talent Composite rankings. That year, he took Washington to the national championship, and they lost to Michigan. You look at what Mike Elko did at Duke. Duke, before he got there, was more of a basketball school. Football was an afterthought. And when I look at Brian Kelly and I see him making excuses for why he doesn't have enough, it makes me feel like this dude just is never going to have enough just because he's not enough as a head coach. With Marcus Freeman, though, he has no problem winning with the guys that he has right now. And I know that Brian Kelly already took Notre Dame to a national championship in the past. But the difference is Notre Dame, back during the BCS era when they made it, they didn't have such a gauntlet to get to that game as what Marcus Freeman had to go through to get to that national championship this year against Ohio State. He had to beat Indiana, who's a top 10 team, Georgia, who's a top 10 team, Penn State, who's a top 10 team. He had to beat 3 straight top 10 teams 3 consecutive weeks in order to get to this game. Brian Kelly didn't have that amount of rigor to get to Notre Dame's national championship, the long one that they made under him. And when they went into that game, I was listening to an interview with Manti Te'o that's on YouTube. He said that before the game even started, they knew that they were outmatched. Just when you look at the size that Alabama had when they were coming out of the tunnel onto the field for that game compared to what Notre Dame had. You see, when you have a great coach, he can make up for certain limitations. Brian Kelly can't make up for certain limitations just because he's going to use those limitations as an excuse for why he can't win. All Brian Kelly has done is constantly make excuses for why he can't get it done. You know, it's funny how I heard somebody try to say if Notre Dame had an SEC schedule, they wouldn't be in the playoffs, but Marcus Freeman this season is 2-0 against the 2 teams that Brian Kelly felt to beat this year, that being USC and the other one being Texas A&M. And remember, Notre Dame beat Texas A&M in College Station week 1 of the regular season. LSU went to College Station and they completely imploded on themselves in the second half of that game. You know, Marcus Freeman beat that Lincoln Riley team, but yet Brian Kelly couldn't. You know, I'm starting to see an overlying theme when it comes to discussing Brian Kelly. He's somebody that needs more and continues to do less with it. Meanwhile, Marcus Freeman is doing more with what Brian Kelly said wasn't enough for him. You know, Brian Kelly is a good coach, but he's not a great coach. You see, when he was at Notre Dame, he was a big fish in a small pond. But in the SEC, where you're going up against coaches that are just as good as you on a week-to-week basis and teams that have the same amount of talent that's what you have, you go from being a big fish in a small pond to being a little fish in the ocean with a lot of sharks. And right now, Brian Kelly's swimming with the sharks. And Marcus Freeman is quickly starting to rise up the ranks. And he's starting to cement himself as one of the best coaches in college football. When you see the way that Notre Dame beat Penn State with the backup offensive tackle, their backup quarterback having to come in before halftime, he was able to drive them down the field, get some points. You know, it's a testament to how good of a coach Marcus Freeman is because he just finds a way to elevate the players that he has. And meanwhile, you got Brian Kelly who's screaming at his receivers. You know, like Brian Kelly just doesn't look authentic. When I look at the recruiting videos that Brian Kelly has with recruits and he's dancing, it just looks cringy. You know, when he first got to LSU, remember he tried to fake a Southern accent? You know, this dude just isn't authentic. That's why he doesn't resonate with players the same way that Marcus Freeman does. And if you want to be able to win, it's not all about having a great team. It's all about getting that team to play together as a family. That's what Nick Saban did such a great job at Alabama. It wasn't just because he had all the talent, he could buy up everybody. Jimbo Fisher had great teams at Texas A&M, and he never won. You know, you got to bring these players together and you have to create a bond. It has to be one team, one goal. When you see Notre Dame play, they play as a family. They play as one. When you see LSU play, you can't say the same thing. Notre Dame advancing to the national championship with how dominant their playoff run has looked, because they did beat Georgia by 2 possessions. And yeah, they had a close win against Penn State. They handled Indiana. You know, it just is a testament to how LSU kind of did Notre Dame a favor. Because now Notre Dame upgraded that head coach with the guy that understands what it takes to win at Notre Dame. Brian Kelly didn't really quite understand how to maximize everything that he had in South Bend.